That's what I saw. And a lot more. But I wanted you to have just the slightest little glimpse of what it was like in another country where people on a daily basis were laying down their lives for you and me. Where they were giving themselves so that you might have the freedoms that you have here in America. That you might have the liberties that you have to do the things that you get to do. And it goes all the way back, ladies and gentlemen, all the way back to the Revolutionary War, when this country was founded. And in my heart today, it's heavy, because I know right now, as I stand here before you and we meet in this sanctuary, that there are men and women in Afghanistan that are putting their lives on the line, and perhaps before the end of this day, there may be some that will die and give their life for America. That's what I tried to illustrate in that slideshow. Those puffs of smoke looked like just puffs of smoke, but they were large puffs of smoke coming from bombing attacks on enemy positions in Vietnam. All of that was done so that you and I could be free. I really believe that in America today, a lot of people take their freedom for granted, and they forget the price that has been paid. In my heart today, I want to really speak not just to you students and faculty of Sunrise Christian School, but to you veterans. And to all you veterans that are sitting out there today, I want to say thank you. If you were in Vietnam, I'm sure you were probably maybe in some other branch of the service, maybe the Marines, maybe the Army. I don't know where you were and what you were doing, but it doesn't make any difference to me, because I know what it's like to leave home when you're young and to be afraid and wonder, will I return and see my mom and dad and brother and my friends? Thank you, gentlemen. If there are any lady veterans here today, thank you for your service. I came from a military family. My father was in the Navy in World War II, building naval shore facilities and combat zones in the South Pacific. My brother was in the Air Force in the 1960s, stationed in Okinawa, Japan, and also at Tyndall Air Force Base, Florida, and he was doing data processing. But in 1968, I joined the United States Air Force. After serving in basic training and tech school, I received my first set of orders to South Vietnam, and I was stationed at Da Nang Air Force Base, which was in the northern sector of South Vietnam, and my job was a ground radio operator. Now, what you saw in those pictures, the young man sitting at a desk in a green outfit, that was me. And I was sitting in a tactical operations center in downtown Da Nang, and I was helping to coordinate the airstrikes that you saw in the picture. I was in the plane and took the pictures on a different day that you saw, but my job was to help coordinate those airstrikes. And I was assigned to the 20th Tactical Air Support Squadron, coordinating that air support. And those little airplanes that had the twin tails that were putting in the smoke rockets for the bombers, those planes were flown by what they call forward air controllers. There were a lot of different aircrafts that different services used over there, but ours happened to be the Cessna 02 and the OB-10 Bronco. But these facts put in these fighter bombers. And while I was there, I also had the opportunity to be a backup radio operator on a C-47. You saw it. I don't remember just exactly which slide it was, but you saw a picture of a C-47. And this was the gravy job that I had while I was overseas. Because when I was the backup radio operator for that airlines, I got to fly to places like Hong Kong, Philippines, Taiwan, to help deliver supplies and maybe pick up passengers and carry them back and forth. And it was a gravy job, and I was thankful that I got a chance during that period of time of serving in Vietnam just to get out of country, just to be away from the fear of dying. After my first year, or my first tour in Vietnam was over, I returned to Shaw Air Force Base in South Carolina. And they didn't need me as a radio operator in South Carolina, they just needed me as an admin specialist. So as some would say, I got to fly a desk. But it just wasn't my bag. It just wasn't what I was interested in. So I went to see somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody else. And after 6 to 8 months of being at Shaw Air Force Base in South Carolina, I got another set of orders to go back to Vietnam. And you're probably thinking, Mr. Bowman, you must have been crazy. No, I wasn't crazy, but it was just something that I felt like I needed to do. Because I knew that there were people that were suffering and dying over there. And I just couldn't sit back here in the comforts that I had here while I knew that there were people over there that were giving their life. So I went back, and I went back to Bien Hoa Air Force Base in the southern sector of South Vietnam to work for the 19th Tactical Air Support Squadron. And I worked on base like the pictures that you saw, but I was also on a forward operation location, helping to coordinate airstrikes in both South Vietnam and Cambodia. Before returning to the States after that year of service in Bien Hoa, I also helped provide radio communication and close air support from a naval ship, which you saw in the picture, in the video, that big ship, and what they were doing with those cranes, they were actually taking our radio jeeps off of the ground, lifting them up, setting them on top of the ship, and that's where we did our radio communications during this special operation. What was the operation for? We were going to return North Vietnamese prisoners of war in exchange for South Vietnamese prisoners of war, and we were going to do this at the militarized zone, which was that area of Vietnam that separated the North Vietnamese aggressors from the South Vietnamese who we were fighting for. So we went on this journey to the DMZ, but after we got on station there, the North Vietnamese changed their mind, decided they didn't want to exchange their prisoners for ours, and so we went home with no exchange at all. But after that, time ran out, and I returned in 1971 as a clerk typist to Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama, and was discharged from the Air Force in 1972. So that's basically a rundown of what my experience of 4 years in the U.S. Air Force was like. What was it like, Mr. Bowman? Well, I can tell you right now, I didn't come home a hero in my eyes. I never shot at anybody, and as far as I know, I was never shot at. I went through rocket, mortar, sapper attacks, especially in Da Nang, which was my first tour. In fact, they called Da Nang Rocket City or Rocket Alley because they constantly got hammered with 122 millimeter rockets. Woke us up in the middle of the night, and what was kind of ironic about it was I stayed and slept in a barracks there on the base, and it was a 2-story barracks. Well, I was on the 2nd floor. These barracks were made out of wood, so if a rocket happened to land right outside your building, you might as well just stay in the bed. There's no use in rolling off the bed onto the floor because the shrapnel would just come right through the floor and the side walls of that building and get you. Well, thank the Lord in heaven that that never happened to me, but I hate to say there were those that was not the case. So, you know, even though I never shot at anybody, even though I was never personally shot at, there were those around me that they were in harm's way. Our forward air controllers flew Cessna 02s, and the ground radio operators were allowed to fly with them on missions, and that's why I had the pictures that I showed you in the video, because they gave us permission to go with them. It was not a part of my job, so I was really risking my life for no reason. But you see, that was the kind of attitude a lot of us guys had while we were over there. When you got there, you realized in your own mind, you know what, I may not go back home. I may never see my family again. I may die while I'm here, so I might as well go for the gusto. I might as well do whatever I can. And so as a 22-year-old, I just said, okay, if you'll let me go, I'll go. And I hate to say it to you today, but there were some of our officers that I flew with that were shot down while they were there. But I thank God that it didn't happen while I was in the aircraft. But I felt bad, grieved in my spirit for those folks, the families of those guys that never came back because they were shot down. But our FACs, or our forward air controllers, marked those targets that you saw in the movie with rockets that were white phosphorus rockets. And then they just directed the aircraft in relationship to that smoke that they saw on the ground. They would either say, hit my smoke, or move it 2 clicks this way or 5 clicks this way, because those fighters were coming so fast, they couldn't see what we can see out of that small aircraft. So they had to depend on us, or they had to depend on that officer behind the wheel flying that aircraft. Occasionally, though, the pilots would let us radio operators hold the plane on course and level while the pilot studied his map and surveyed the target area. So we were not totally useless there. They would let us help them out a little bit, but it was nothing compared to the job that they had. So what was my experience in the Air Force like? Overall, my experience was a good experience, both overseas and stateside. But the one thing, in the last number of years since I really truly became a Christian, the one thing that I regret about my experience in Vietnam was that I was not saved. Because there were so many guys that needed Jesus. There were so many guys that were getting Dear John letters. Guys that were married and their wives decided to not wait on them, and so they sent them a letter in the mail while they were there saying, you know, I've decided to leave you. So you won't find me when you get home. And these guys, it devastated, it crushed them. So, you know, it was more than just the physical dangers of being in the war zone, but it was the emotional and the psychological things that men had to face while they were there. So, those are some of the things that were going on around me. And since I became a Christian, I regret that I wasn't a Christian then, because I could have ministered to them. I could have shared the hope of Jesus Christ, because I want to tell you what, when you're in harm's way, you're thinking about most of the time one thing: am I going to survive or am I going to die? And unfortunately, a lot of people didn't think about that. They didn't care whether they died or not. And it was all because there was nobody there to tell them that there was a God in heaven that gave His only begotten Son to die for them so that they could have eternal life. And so many of these folks died in their sins. And you and I both know where they would be today. So I regret that I wasn't living for Jesus. I knew what I needed to do spiritually, but I just didn't seem to care. And that was an attitude that a lot of people had. They did their jobs, but you know, then in the evening they got plastered. They just did all kinds of different things just to try to